Aransas, welcome out here to Pioneer RV Resort. We love sharing with the community. But I'd like to talk a minute. We've got Mr. Jim Moloney here. And all of us know in Port Aransas, a Port Aransas person, what is Port Aransas? It's a drinking town with a fishing problem. What is Jim Moloney? He's a businessman with a history problem. Jim's daytime job, energy compression, but his real job is chronicling South Texas history. He's worked for 30 years doing that. He came to this area. He's not native with it, but ever since that he's been here, he's worked to do that. He is the publisher of Nueces Press. Nueces Press, when you do a book like this, they're not big sellers. If you want to not make money, get into the small-time publishing business. But what does it do? It preserves our history. So as we're long gone on there, these books will remain. So Jim's efforts, and with Murphy Givens, the old Kohler Times historian, we are chronicling our South Texas history. And I know Jim would appreciate, he's got a whole slew of books here. Actually, one of them that was written by a relative of mine, Perilous Tales of Texas, but it's very much about this. But part of Jim, he's civically minded on there. He's on the Community Foundation with it, but more importantly, he is the treasurer of the Corpus Christi Museum, which is one of the largest combined natural history and science museums. And if any of you have not seen it, it's well worth your time on there. And Jim and I were swapping history stories earlier on there. We're all here for our love of history, and we'll be visiting a little bit more on that. But and then one last thing. When we started this park 24 years ago, we had postcards in the park on there. Now, Jim's going to be talking about postcards. And what are postcards? Well, they're kind of like telephone landlines. We used to have those here, too. On there, and we still have a fax machine, I think, every once in a while. But this is a form of communication that's rapidly ending. And all of us, of course, that know about postcards have written postcards, but think, anybody 20 years or younger, they don't even know what a postcard is. So Jim will be talking about his collection that he's been working decades on. He's always been a friend of the museum, so I've talked long enough. I'm a politician on the sideline. Without further ado, please welcome Mr. Jim Moloney.
Thanks, Greg. We're going to start off with something that I didn't really plan on talking about, but I realized when I got here that you guys would be interested in this. And Greg is actually going to tell you what you're looking at. But about 20 years ago, I saw this painting in Charles Butt's home. And it's a painting by a guy named Thomas Snokes, who was here during the Civil War. He painted two paintings of the Civil War. One was the Battle of Corpus Christi, and the other was the Battle of Corpus Christi Pass. So since we're about to bring out Thomas Snokes' diary that he wrote during the Civil War, so I made a phone call to Charles Butt's assistant and said, we'd like to get a copy of that print. So you guys are the first people to see this print. And it is, actually it's a painting of the Battle of Corpus Christi Pass. And Greg just tells me he wrote 3 articles for the Island Moon on that battle, so I'm going to let him tell you what you're looking at.
Well, I'm going to be speaking next week, and I'll be touching on there, but if we look to the right, that's the Stars and Bars. So Texas was part of the Confederacy on there, and this battle took place. It was in December. I think it was December 7th. I'm kind of surprised. I was elated when I saw this picture. And on the right is a schooner. It's called the Queen of the Bay. That's part of the Confederacy. And on the left are 2 cutters. And they had a ship, it was a steamboat out in San Antonio Bay. It was called the Sachem. And they also had a bark out in the Gulf of Mexico. You can barely, it's just a whisper in the top corner, and that was to block off the Queen of the Bay. They're trying to the Union forces are trying to capture the Queen of the Bay, because back in those times that they would have sold the Queen of the Bay, the schooner, for prize money. And so all of those sailors on there, they're looking, we're going to make some bucks off of this deal. But unbeknownst to them, there was a Confederate force hidden in the sand dunes on there. And as the cutters came up they thought there were just 3 people on board. And they had a fuselage of fire on there, drove them off. 3 Union folks were killed. Another 6 were seriously hurt on there. In the dunes, there's a future governor of Texas. I forgot which governor it is now. Jim caught me off guard. But this took place on Padre Island, and if you all are familiar with Padre Island, it's where Whitecap goes out to the Gulf on there, and where all the condominiums are located now on Padre Island and the seawall, they're back there. So what happened? The Union, the Confederates fired on there, those 2 small cutters. They made a beeline over there to the beach to get out of the line of the fire. And they thought they were out of range, but unbeknownst to them, these were some sharpshooters from Seguin, Texas, and one of them was standing there, whap, at about 500 yards. Ensign Reynolds, I believe, he was hit on there. And so Corpus Christi Pass from here, it's about 15 miles, or down the island about 20. So they lost their cutters on there. They had to walk down the beach, dragging their wounded with them on there with their tails between their legs. They thought that they had just easy money coming up there. And the Confederates captured those 2 cutters. They sailed into Corpus Bay, and it was a great celebration in Corpus Christi, because those Union scoundrels that, they prevailed on them. And that was the biggest skirmish that took place in this section of Texas coast. And one thing in saying that, so we had 3 casualties here, and total casualties in the Civil War were about 500,000 died. So it wasn't a gnat on a pimple on a hair with it as far as the Civil War. But I'll be talking about the Civil War next year. But it was just, being a history nut, real exciting for me to see that. Worth my trip.
The Gulf of Mexico is on the left, right?
No, it's in the right. It's in the right. It's right up, right in here. That little slip of water right there is the Gulf of Mexico. Then the boat's in there, the bark.
Yeah.
This is Packery Channel, essentially.
Yeah. Past Packery. Packery would be there, but land has changed. This is Padre Island, and this is Mustang Island.
Yeah. Yes. It's essentially where you go across the bridge today. But the pass moves, so who knows where it was back in those days. Okay, so I just thought you guys might like to see that. Now we're going to go to what I had prepared, hopefully. I've lost it. There it is. So I have 2 things to do tonight. The first group is just a bunch of photographs that are photographs and postcards that are in my collection of Port A. And then the second part is a PowerPoint slideshow on the 1919 hurricane. So we're going to talk about the postcards first, and this one is the Tarpon Club. Built in 1898, it was a private hunting club for 400 of the most prominent businessmen and sportsmen. A president and a past president were both members, and it was at the south end of St. Joseph's Island, so right across the channel from Port A. And a guy named Eddie Green, the son of the Wicked Witch of Wall Street, Hetty Green, built it for him and his friends to enjoy hunting. And hunting in the winter for ducks and geese, and in the summer it was fishing, primarily for tarpon. It only lasted about 5 or 6 years. It was built in 1898, and I think by 1905 it was being torn down. Because it was pretty remote, hard to get here. So there's the Tarpon Club. Did I miss one? Yeah, and there's its boat. This was the first gasoline launch in South Texas. It was the boat that would ferry. They used it to ferry passengers from Rockport, where the train ended, down to the Tarpon Club, and also to move people around a little bit. And this was after the Tarpon Club was gone. It was sailing in Corpus Christi Bay. And that's how they used to sail boats down here. They just overload them with everybody. But he had to actually send Ed Cotter, who was one of the major founders of Port Aransas, to Chicago to learn how to run a gasoline engine. This had a gasoline engine. Wrong way. Wrong way. And this is just a photograph of Port A, 1920s, with cars lined up for the single ferry that only held about, I think, 6 cars. So you can see that's a long wait. Times haven't changed. My wife and I debated whether to come over to the ferry tonight or not. And we didn't. And then these are all miscellaneous, out of order and so forth, but this is a Doc McGregor photograph of a guy with 2 6-foot tarpons. And I wish those days were back. And here they are going out for the tarpon rodeo. They would all start at the same time in the morning, and they'd all head out to fish in the channel for tarpon. This is a bird's eye view of Port Aransas, about early 30s. Gives you an idea how big and populous it was back then. Think about what that area looks like today. Full of houses. There's a photograph of them hauling an oil rig out to the Gulf. This picture was taken in the summer of 1954, and it was 7 girls from this area who rowed the Port Aransas float to first place in the out-of-town floats in the San Antonio Fiesta Parade. And I just love this picture. Whoops, wrong way. There. Bunch of good-looking young ladies back in those days. And most of these girls also are on the cover of the Port Aransas book that you guys did. This picture is actually hanging in the back wall of Scoopy's in Corpus Christi, down by Snoopy's. And so these were all young beauties, 54 years, 1954, and I calculated today they're in their 80s, if they're still around. And then I've known a lot about Barney Farley for a long time because I helped work on the Fishing Yesterday's Gulf Coast that he wrote. But here's a piece of music that he wrote. It's Gee, I'm Glad I Married You by Barney Farley. Words and music. No idea. This is an early picture of the life-saving station, which is now where the U.S. Coast Guard station is. And it's early because it says it's Tarpon, Texas. And when did the name change? 1909?
1911.
So you can actually see in the center of it, right here is the life-saving boat, ready to roll out the ramp and go help. And of course, this is when ships still crashed on the bar coming in. It hadn't been a lot of dredging done, and so it was a pretty tight bar coming across. Here is a excursion boat, the Nereid of Tarpon, Texas. Looks pretty luxurious for the day. And a couple bathing beauties. And this was a costume up to right after World War I ended. The young ladies wore cotton dresses down to their knees, stockings, shoes, and many times they had bonnets on too. And my theory is that when the boys came back from Paris, they brought back the bathing suits also after World War I. And then there's some people just out there playing on a branch, waiting in the Gulf of Mexico, December 1st, 1909, Tarpon, Texas. And this was the famous 150-mile Ocean Beach drive from Port Aransas to Port Isabel. And they promoted that, and I cannot imagine driving 150 miles in the 30s on that beach. And here's the Hangout Cafe, which was very popular in the old days in Port A. And in the bottom corner is the old slogan, where they bite every day. And there is another view of the life-saving station on the left, and on the right, the red roof building is the Tarpon Inn, the early Tarpon Inn, the one before that burned. Here's a guest card to the La Bolognese room. I believe that was a gambling establishment. Is that correct? Notice the phone number was 77. And I'm told that gambling was pretty wide open here because the only way to get here was to come on the ferry. And if a stranger was coming, the word would go out and the gambling would be closed up until the stranger left. And they finally got busted when some guy, one of the revenuers or inspectors, came over, started hanging around, go back. He became a regular. Then they got busted. There's just a dolphin. We used to catch and eat dolphin. And I've got probably a dozen postcards of dolphin. It's stingrays. Look at the size of that sucker. I got lots of postcards of those too. And a sawfish. This is a 16-foot sawfish. And they still catch them around here every so often. They're a breed of shark. Whoops, one too many. Here's one of them building the jetties where they would, the engine is here, it backed a car with rocks on, out the jetty. They'd pick up a rock and sit it down to make the jetty, and then another one and another one. When the thing was empty, they'd take it back and get more. And then as the jetty got built, they would build more track out until they got it out as far as they would. So just a hopscotch effect all the way out. Pretty ingenious. Wrong way.
About when was that?
When was the jetty built?
1912.
Thank you.
I guess it was 1980.
Somewhere in that range, yeah. And then one of my favorite cards is all the tarpon cards. And this is my favorite of all the tarpon cards. If you caught a tarpon, you could remove a scale and keep it as a souvenir, and they would sell postcards that says, scale from tarpon caught at Port Aransas, Texas, and you would paste your scale onto the postcard, and at the top there was the fish. Now, I say I collect postcards. Most of the postcards I have do not have messages on the back. What I've found is, if somebody sends you a postcard from wherever they are with a little greeting, you read it and throw it away. But the cards that have ended up in my collection, for the most part, don't have messages on, and they were taken home as souvenirs, and people kept them. And then eventually they get into the marketplace through garage sales and estate sales, and there are postcard dealers. There's two postcards. There's a postcard show in Dallas and another one in Houston in March, and I'm going to go to at least one of those because I haven't been in a while. And when I first started collecting cards, I could go and buy 100, and now if I find 5 in a postcard show, I'm very fortunate. But it's always fun to go and see what's there and see the dealers. Entrance to the Port A channel, I think pretty much still looks like this. And that was taken in the 30s, 40s, I guess. J.M. Tabor was a was the ferry boat captain here in Port Aransas. And he looked like Popeye, and he would pose all the time. And he was a very well-known character here, and he passed away in 1971. But he really does look like Popeye, doesn't he? And then the free fishing pier at Port Aransas, where they bite every day. This is 1954. And there's another one of a hammerhead shark caught by J.E. Cotter in Port Aransas, a 14-foot. And that reminds me of a story in this book, Fishing Yesterday's Gulf Coast by Barney Farley. Farley was the young guide and was chosen because he didn't have a wife to catch a 14-foot hammerhead shark that was going around and taking a bite out of everybody's tarpon as it was being landed. So he's ruining everybody's prizes. So Farley, they rigged him all out. They gave him half of a tarpon from the day before that had been ruined, put him in a rowboat and towed him out, and then turned him loose. And so eventually he hooks the hammerhead shark. And it was 14 foot long. It was this big. And so he hooks it, and the next thing you know, he'd been towed 2 miles out to sea by that hammerhead shark in a rowboat. Now, what do you do when you're 2 miles out in the Gulf? And so Barney, pretty sharp guy, the shark got tired and was just laying there, so he rowed around to the other side of him. So he was seaward and yanked on it. Shark took him back. So then he shot it, and he missed the kill spot, and he went for another ride just like the last one. But eventually he got it killed, and that was the end of that. But he was chosen because he didn't have a wife. And just an old, one of the many fishing postcards I've got. This is kingfish, and just look at the size of that catch. This is the 30s. And there's a couple kids with a sea bass. And so that's a picture of Barney Farley's book. So I've got a few of these here. If anybody wants them at the end of the night, I'll be happy to sell you one. And we did not publish that. Murphy Givens and I did not publish this. But I was involved in getting it published and loaned postcards to Texas A&M Press for the, so every chapter is illustrated with one of my postcards related to the topic of the chapter. And Barney is the guy that took FDR fishing in 1937, so it starts out with his adventures with FDR and embellished as only Barney could do it, apparently. So we're going to quit there and go to the 1919 hurricane. Maybe.
Same Farley as Farley Boat Works?
Yep, that was his brothers. Yep, the Farley Boat Works were the brothers, and it wasn't a very big town. By 2 or 3 generations, I think they all were. I have a friend that grew up in Orange Grove. You know where Orange Grove is? About 30 miles west of Corpus Christi. And it wasn't a very big town. And he said when he was a kid, he had to, when he was about to date a girl, he had to go ask his mother if they were related. And it's Kevin Kieschnick, who is now the county tax collector. I don't think he found a girl there, but no, I don't want that. I want this one. So now we're going to talk about the 1919 hurricane that devastated both Corpus Christi and Port Aransas. And Port Aransas was virtually wiped off the face of the earth. The water started rolling in, and nobody knew a storm was coming, first of all. So the next thing you know, water's coming in, and the people in Port Aransas all started heading away from the water, and they all gathered in one area, and they realized they had to get to the top of the dunes because that's the only place to go. So everybody formed lines single hand and walked to the top of the highest dune, and apparently at the top of the dunes there's usually a little depression, and they all got in that depression and they waited the storm out in the dunes, and they all did okay. So this is the storm. It was formed in the east of the Leeward Islands on September 2nd, and it slowly moved north and west, hitting the Bahamas first and sank a couple ships there, and then hit Key West about September 10th. And while on September 10th it sank a ship named the Valderrama that had 488 people aboard. And then it headed into the Gulf. And one of the interesting things about this storm, it is the only storm to hit the coast of Texas that went north of Cuba. Most of them go south through the Gulf of Mexico and curve up, but this one went up and then went west. And it was a very slow-moving storm. And so on Corpus, on the morning of September 14th, the barometer finally started to fall. The winds picked up even more. They'd started that about midnight and risen to about 45 miles an hour. But on September 13th, they actually took the storm warnings down because they thought the storm had gone into Louisiana. So it rolled into Port Aransas first, obviously, but there weren't very many people in Port Aransas, but Corpus Christi had about 5,000 or 6,000. And so about noon, the water quickly rose to 18 inches high in the downtown streets. And then about an hour later, in 20 minutes, it rose to 6 feet. And by the end of the day, it was 12 feet deep in downtown Corpus Christi. So this is a view of the storm, and came across the bay, through Port A, right across the top, and so it was. No, actually, the winds came that way. The storm actually made a landfall down by Kingsville, and so we were getting that northeast side that you don't want to get, and so it came in, and in Corpus, it hit Corpus, and right here is North Beach of downtown Corpus Christi, and then it pushed all the water all the way to the end of Nueces Bay over here, and up to White Point, that little thing sticking up there. And that's where the bodies ended up after the storm. So this is a view, this is a cover picture that I just showed you, but it's a view of the city of Corpus Christi the day after the storm from the bluff. And this really tells a lot about the storm. First thing they're doing, you see, is pretty much the streetcar. And the streetcar is stranded there because they were sending the streetcars down to North Beach, coming back, and making a loop up to the bluff, dropping people off and going back. So that's right here at Mesquite Street and Laguna. This is Laguna, but today it is now John Sartine Street. And out there in the bay is where Whataburger by the Bay is today. So I'll give you a little thing. So the streetcar is there, and notice right here, that's a high water mark. And it's also here on the streetcar is not as visible, but up here is a high water mark. And so it's like 6 or 8 feet, 3 blocks from the bay. And the storm also had a lot of oil in it because it destroyed all the oil tanks which were on Harbor Island. Harbor Island was the port at that time. So there were oil tanks with oil that had just come in because we were importing at the time. And that oil came with the storm and washed over everything. So you got 2 guys right here in the middle of the picture wandering through the debris, I'm assuming looking for bodies. And you got a couple guys on the back of a flatbed truck picking up a boat. The first order of business after the storm, they had to clear a path through each street so you could get around. So they did that by hand with a truck, and they hauled it all down to where the arena is today in that general area. And then it's harder to see, but in this debris is a whole bunch of cotton bales. The port, the wharf, which was over where the yacht club is today in Corpus Christi, was the municipal wharf, and it had bales of cotton stacked on it for shipping out. And the storm picked them up and used them to destroy buildings. But the other interesting thing about this picture is, if those of you up front probably can see it, the telephone and electric lines are all still attached to the poles. The storm was not about wind, it was all water. The winds peaked at about 100 to 110 miles an hour, but that's not all that fast for a hurricane. And that was just 1 or 2 gusts. It wasn't a storm, a steady 110 miles an hour. So the damage was done by high water washing everything out of its way. Oh, wrong way. So this is the Japonica, and the top corner picture is the Japonica at Port Aransas, because it used to sail between Corpus Christi and Port A and Aransas Pass and so forth, and it was an excursion boat. And then the bottom one, that's it after the storm. It washed 100 yards inland to the base of Corpus Christi's bluff. And they floated that and made it go back to work after that. And then this is that municipal wharf I talked about. Those are cotton bales up in the upper left, cotton bales on the wharf pre-storm. And then all that's left of it is a railroad car on its side and the cotton compress. And the rest of the wharf is pretty wiped clean. That's after the storm. And the Seaside Hotel on the upper left, it was a 3-story hotel. Open center was for dancing and so forth. Bottom floor was restaurants and a bar and gaming and so forth, photography studio. And the bottom picture is what was left after it. Where was that located? You know where People Street T-Head is? Pretty much right there, but in closer to the shore. Because People Street, there's now 500 yards of land between where Water Street is and the shoreline, 500 feet, and at this time of the storm, Water Street was the edge of the bay. This was right downtown. And a rooming house that was at the pier of another, at the base of another pier, and you can see what it looked like before the storm, 2 stories, and on the bottom, part of the second floor is left. Yeah, these were all right downtown. There was no other city than downtown. Corpus Christi in those days ended about where today's yacht club is and went down towards North Beach. And then North Beach was suburbia. That's where the really nice homes and the people that could afford a decent home, the middle class and the upper class, had a lot of their homes. And that was wiped clean. We'll see that. Here's Spawn Sanitarium. That was where the Texas State Aquarium is today, right at the edge, right at the corner at the edge of the bay, and 3 big wings, and the bottom picture shows 1 wing left. Remarkably, in that building, only 4 people died. 2 were patients that were too sick to move, that were in one of the sections swept away, and a nun and an aide stayed with them, and they all lost their lives. But everybody else was able to move from place to place and get in this section that survived. And then this is the Breakers Hotel, the beach hotel. At the time of the storm, it was being used as a U.S. government hospital for wounded that had come back from World War I. And so the bottom picture shows it without a roof. The whole first floor, you can actually see through it, is swept through. The second floor was pretty much flooded. The third and fourth floor just had all their windows taken out. But that was able to be, that's the only building on North Beach out of over 200 that was able to be rebuilt. And it became the Breakers Hotel, and I don't know whether any of you remember the Breakers as kids, but that was on North Beach, and it lasted until Celia got it in 1970. The hurricanes always get you. And And then this is the causeway over to Portland from Corpus Christi. Upper left is the beautiful masonry causeway they put in 1914. The 1916 hurricane did damage to it. And the 1919 storm wiped it off the face of the map. And so for 4 years, till 1923, you had to go all the way back around to up where the Nueces, where you can get across the Nueces up by Cal Allen and back to get to Portland. It was a 40-mile drive to get to Portland. And then here's a photograph of William Street, and here you get a good view of those cotton bales. And on the bluff, we have the house right in the middle is Henrietta King's home, the widow of Richard King. And on the left is John G. Kennedy's home. So their homes were up on the bluff. Kennedy's home they actually used as a hospital because the homes on the bluff were untouched. They didn't even have shingles or windows broken. And in many cases, people didn't know there was a storm going on that night because it was just raining and blowing, but not that bad. So it gives you an idea of what the storm did. And here's another view. If you go to Water Street Seafood Company downtown, this mass of cotton bales is in their parking lot. So and across the street, those buildings all survived. One thing we found is that the buildings that were made out of masonry, brick and stone, survived the storm. But anything built of wood had been built on piers, pilings and piers, and the storm picked them up and floated them around and ran them into each other, or the cotton bales took them out. And so you can see a house that has floated in here, and some more roofs and stuff, and lots of cotton bales. And then a view of Chaparral Street. So this is Water Street, and then Chaparral. So this is 2 blocks away. Look at the pile of wood in the middle. It's one of my another favorite picture because this looks like an awning, doesn't it? But if you're up here in the front, you can see there's arms on that awning. Those are men's shirts that have been washed and laundered and hung out to dry. Because everything in town was destroyed and people needed clothes. So they were reselling them. And so you got to see some men hanging around, a big crew down there. Every able-bodied man in town was conscripted to join the cleanup crew. So just like those guys you saw on Mesquite Street. Everybody had to help clean up, either drive a truck or coordinate things or do the labor. And we did this book 10 years ago, so I was talking to people told me he was old Mr. London from the London Gin area, and his father had been a kid in the 1919 storm, about 12 years old. So the 12-year-old and the 14-year-old and the 8-year-old came to town the day after the storm and on the farm wagon and horse to see what had happened. And they were met at the city's edge by a soldier who took the 12-year-old and the 14-year-old and said, "You and the horse and the wagon are coming with me, you're helping clean up." And they had the 8-year-old walk back to London to tell their parents what happened to him. And here's Irish Town. This is down by the area where the Corpus Christi Museum and the arena and all that is. This was solid houses, and you can see it looks like a lake with most of the houses gone. And here's a view of the debris pile. The building on the right is Spahn Sanitarium. And all that wood that you saw around the city, they picked it up and stacked it, just like they did in south of Rockport and out here where they had that big pile somewhere where you could haul it all off. They had to do that down there. And except they didn't do anything with it. They just left it there. And people could come and buy truckloads of it and build houses or repair their house or whatever, although most houses couldn't be repaired. And I'm told that at the start of World War II, there was still some wood in that pile. So this is the plaque at Rose Hill Cemetery, and it says, "In memory of the unidentified dead who lost their lives in the storm of September 14th, 1919. So in the back of our book, we have a list of all the dead. 282 people. Only one is unidentified. But yet we got a whole pile there. And so what we have figured out is that the city, whoever was in charge of counting bodies, only counted bodies that had a name. And if you weren't identified or you were missing in action, you weren't dead. And so I met a lady 10 years ago who was telling me that 10 people in their family lost their lives, all by the last name of Wright. And of that 10, there's 4 in the back of the book, but there's 9 with gravestones in Rose Hill Cemetery with their names on them, and 1 body was never recovered. So we think that the undercounting was significant. And I theorize that one of the reasons there was a reason, if there was a reason not to count so many, is because Corpus Christi wanted the port. And so we didn't want to have a big, gigantic death toll for the city. So any reason they could have to not count somebody, they did. And they made each body had an index card that was attached to it, and it had a description of the person: sex, height, weight, approximate age, color of the eyes, jewelry they were wearing, what kind of clothes, any identifying marks. And so they had those for all the bodies, and I've got a couple in the back of the book. And it was just really an unbelievable disaster. And so then, after that, Corpus Christi decided that we wanted the port, and the first requirement was to get a breakwater. So we built a breakwater in 1924 because you had to have still water in front of the entrance to the port. And that's still there today. That's the breakwater. And so they figured that solved the hurricane problem. We all know that was false. So there's the port in 1926 with the bascule bridge at the entrance. Again, Corpus Christi is not very developed either in those days. This is where Spahn Sanitarium had been, over in here. And of course, this was all dredged out. This was dredged to 26 foot deep for the port. And then in 1933, we had another hurricane. This is a view of downtown. This is, if you know where Vietnam Restaurant is, that's Vietnam Restaurant today. So you can see we got flooding again. That breakwater didn't help a bit. So that, I guess, woke them up. So by 1940, we started building a seawall. And you can see again how far it is from Water Street, because those cars and all that kind of stuff is where Water Street is. And so you're way out in the bay. They built that out there first, and then they dredged in front of the seawall and pumped all that dirt in behind the seawall to raise the land level. And they also had to raise the houses. There were some houses down there that, these were worker shacks, but there was a whole bunch of them about where the art museum is today, or roughly in that area, and they all had to be raised up on pilings, just like they did in Galveston. And so here's a 1940 picture of the seawall to Cooper's Alley. Cooper's Alley is where the yacht club would be out here today. And so you can see how they built the seawall, and then this is all dredge fill in between. And then they did the other half later in the year. So that's 1919, the storm. I've got all our books up here except for one. I've got the Barney Farley book, and so if anybody's interested in a book, they're all $40, and I can take cash checks and credit cards, and I'll take questions if anybody has a question. Yes, sir.
I heard that one report said that in the 1919 storm there were only 7 buildings left in Port Aransas. Do you have any information related to that?
I don't. Do you, Mark? There weren't many, because they were all washed away. And I would probably say that's right, because our account in the back of the 1919 book, we have an account on Port Aransas, and they actually came down out of the dunes and went to one of the homes. And the building that the museum is in was a survivor of the storm, right?
That's the story I tell when I go at the museum, is that the 1919 storm left only 7 buildings. The Coast Guard building, built in 1912, was not one of the 7 buildings left. So instead of rebuilding the Coast Guard building, they bought one of the houses that had survived the storm, and that became the museum.
Okay. That makes sense, because you had to get back in business right away. Yeah.
And if you raise your hand, Ernie will give you a mic if you have a question.
And we might turn the lights, another light back on or something. So I've been playing with this 1919 storm thing for a long time, because about 12 years ago we actually started on the book. And at the time we didn't know a lot of information on it. And I had a good stack of postcards about that big, and Murphy had another stack about that. So that's about 200. And we had to go through and figure out what the pictures were, because most of them weren't labeled. So you had to figure out what you're looking at. It was quite a chore. It was a lot of fun. Yes, Candace. My wife in the back.
This is my husband. Tell him how many postcards you have.
Somewhere in excess of 7,000. I have been at this for 30 years. And
We have only 700 in the museum.
right, but you only have Port Aransas. Yeah, see, more than half of mine are Corpus Christi, which was a much bigger city. But I have about 2 linear feet of Port Aransas postcards, and you guys have got almost all those, because Mark Creighton came over to my office a couple days with a scanner and scanned every one of them, and so they're in your collection. You want to tell? Well, Rick Pratt used to tell the story that you guys were trying to get postcards at Port Aransas. This CC Texas bidder from Corpus Christi would outbid him every time. And so finally somebody said, well, let's call him. And they found out I'd lend them. They didn't have to buy them. So it's worked out to be a good partnership. I've got rid of some bidders against me, and they get all the pictures. Yes, sir.
Jim, do you know how much one of those bales of cotton weighed? Because they
They weigh
sure
about
did a lot
500
of-
pounds, dry. But I think that the center of them was probably still dry, because they were really highly compressed. And I don't think the water got through the center, but I'm going to say 600 or 700 pounds anyway. I know they collected all the bales, and they sent them somewhere to sell them. But nobody can tell me what they sold for, who got the money, or anything. But probably the guys that had bought the cotton got the money. But they did collect them all after the storm. Yes, sir.
I heard that the unofficial estimate of total casualties was up around 800 or 900.
Oh, at least. That's just here. Yeah, and then of course you had the 500 or 600 that were killed on ships in the Caribbean. And I don't think that many people lost their lives in Key West. Yeah. I'd say it could be 1,000. You just don't know. I know that Port A didn't lose very many people. I think I'm thinking 1 or 2. Yeah, that's true. That's true too. Yes.
Is this the same hurricane that destroyed Galveston?
No, Galveston was 1900. This one actually hit Galveston. This storm was a big, slow-moving storm. It was much like was it Katrina, I think. It moved real slow and pushed a wall of water in front of it. And I think the fast-moving storms don't have as high a wall of water, because the 1916 storm was actually, the winds were higher and it was a more violent storm. But it went through Corpus Christi in about 2 hours, and this storm took over like 14 hours to go through Corpus Christi. So, and both 16 and 19 storm hit down by Kingsville, so we got the northeast things. And the 1916 storm took down all the telephone lines and the light lines, but it never put more than about 3 feet of water in town. So it was a totally different storm. You just can't tell. Anybody else? Well, thank you for being an attentive audience.
Again, I'd like to thank Jim and all the people that attended, and also thank you for the donations for the snacks and refreshments too. I appreciate that. We'll see you next week.